Hi, everyone. It's Heather Daly. I am so happy today to be talking to you about SEL. And social emotional learning is one of my favorite topics because it's like finally all the stuff that all of us as adults wish that we had and learned as content in high school and middle school and even before that is now starting to be taught and brought into the classroom. So I couldn't be more happy about this. And for many of you who don't even know what SEL is, this is the perfect place to start, because in this video, I'll be talking about what SEL is and the competencies that have been put forth within SEL that are to be brought in the classroom. And most states have used these 5 competencies as benchmarks in their states in terms of education. So let's get started. I'm going to do a quick share screen with you. And so my video here is going to be accompanied with a PowerPoint presentation. So even before we start, part of what SEL is about our own self-awareness and our own ability to manage. So the first thing that we're going to do, and on all of the videos that Courageous Hearts offers, is we're just going to take a second for ourselves. If you are okay with this, you can go ahead and close your eyes. If you're not okay with that, don't worry, you can just direct your gaze downward and take your attention and bring it inward. And what we're going to do is just check inside and prepare ourselves for learning. So bring your attention to the breath and just be present with the breath for just a moment. Just a single moment of mindfulness of being here and now, because learning happens in the present moment. Sometimes our minds are off into the future or thinking about something that happened in the past. And when our mind is doing that, it's not available to learn. So the first thing we're going to do is just get present right here and right now by letting go of any thoughts, anything from the day so far, any concerns or worries. Just put those to the side so you can be fully here right now. And set an intention for your learning, whatever that looks like for you. In other words, what do you want to get out of this for yourself? And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and let's go ahead and we're going to get started. So the first thing I'd like everyone to know is there is a self-assessment that is on the online portal, and you can assess your own social emotional competencies and through this reflection activity. And this is optional if you're a social worker taking this for an accredited course. You don't have to do that. It's just for your own edification. Oops. So what is SEL? SEL stands for social and emotional learning. And CASEL is the kind of the, gosh, do I want to say the governing body, or it's actually a collaborative or an organization that has really outlined 5 specific competencies that students need to be successful both academically and in life. And this is kind of most states, I don't want to say all because I don't know if that's true, but the majority of states are following CASEL's lead in terms of developing students according to these 5 competencies. And I'll get into those in just a moment. And there are a ton of resources. A lot of them are free if you go to www.casel.org. So let's move on here. If you go to that website, you will find this kind of pie chart looking thing. And what it is, and we're just going to focus on those 5 competencies that are in the center there around the white circle that says SEL. So if you look, there's 2 competencies at the top in orange, and those are self-awareness and self-management. And then there's 2 in green, social awareness and relationship skills. And then there's 1 that's in yellow, and that's responsible decision-making towards the right there. The reason these are in different colors is because they're different competencies. For example, self-awareness and self-management are what are called internal competencies. These are competencies that are really hard to teach. They're more facilitated. They're more something that you support another person or student in finding and developing inside themselves. And these competencies, it's so important to help students to think for themselves and be in touch with their own inner wisdom, their own inner guidance. So you can't teach self-awareness, but you can provide experiences that support students in developing their self-awareness. You can't really teach self-management or emotional regulation. You can give tools, but what has to happen is inside the student themselves for them to navigate the emotions that they're feeling. So these are inner or internal competencies. In green are social awareness and relationship skills. And as you probably guessed, those are external competencies. This is when we are connecting with others, our relationship skills and communicating with them, navigating challenging situations, could be school situations or relationship situations, and being able to navigate those. And social awareness has to do with how our behavior impacts others in the world. So those are two external competencies. And then you have in yellow there, responsible decision making. So what's interesting about this competency is it is both internal and external. So in order to make a responsible decision, there's an inner process that happens of thinking things out, ideally. And then once it's thought out, a decision is made, and then that decision is actually brought into the world, making that decision in the world. So it's both an internal and an external competency. So you'll notice there are concentric circles around the 5 competencies of classrooms, schools, and then homes and communities. And this is ideally, we want to share and operate within these competencies in our classrooms and educate young people and facilitate them in developing these competencies. But it doesn't stop there. We want to basically create a school culture that develops these competencies. And then from there, educate in the home, in families and in communities with these competencies as well. And in most of the work that we do at Courageous Hearts, we focus on self-awareness and self-management because those really are core or foundational skills for the others to develop from. And that's talked about in our other modules. So let's go a little bit more into each of these competencies. We'll start with self-awareness, which is an internal competency, as mentioned. And Castle has come up with these, what are called, I call them sub-competencies, or kind of characteristics, or things that are developed within that competency. So within the self-awareness competency, you have identifying emotions, self-perception and identity, recognizing your own strengths, and then also developing a sense of self-confidence, self-esteem, and then self-efficacy. And then for the self-management competency, you have these sub-competencies, and that is very much about emotions. So we have impulse control, managing stress, and then you have, really disciplining oneself and motivating oneself to be successful. And that is something that comes from the inside, the ability to persevere and set goals and have organizational skills to, basically organize your work and accomplish. What's interesting about these two is that in order to do some of the self-management, you need some of the self-awareness. For example, in order to manage an emotion, you have to be first aware of that emotion. So say there's a young person that's feeling really angry or frustrated, and they have these emotions, and those emotions turn into a behavior that has a negative impact on others. The first thing that really, if that behavior is to shift for that student, they have to be aware of, oh, I'm feeling anger, or I'm feeling frustrated. So self-awareness really comes first. I have a lot of educators approach me and ask, I want to help students with their emotions and how they manage their emotions. And the first thing really is to support them in just how they relate to the emotions as they come up inside of them. Some people use mindfulness as an awareness tool of just observing the emotions and letting it be okay. Sometimes it's our response. It's not okay that I'm feeling anger, that actually escalates the emotion itself. So the first step after becoming aware is accepting whatever the emotion may be and realizing that it's understandable given the circumstances. Yet I digress a little there. So the third competency here, is social awareness. And you notice there's four sub-competencies there. We have perception, perspective taking. So that's being able to understand something from another person's perspective. Empathy, appreciating diversity and respect for others. And then under relationship skills, communicating, effective communication, engaging in a social way. So how to interact with others socially in a healthy way. Building relationships and working cooperatively. And a lot of this comes from working on teams. Being able to resolve conflicts and helping, seeking and helping. So being on either side of that, knowing when to look for help, but also knowing when to help another when you have a tool that you can help others. And it's really interesting because, as I mentioned earlier, the two inner competencies of self-awareness and self-management really need to come first before the external. So you have something like, resolving conflicts. Well, if you are feeling frustrated or angry at somebody, the first step is really to work with that internally before then communicating. If you go to them from a place of high charge or anger and you're lashing at them, it's not really a healthy way to work through a conflict. So that those internal competencies of self-awareness and self-management really need to come first before then resolving a conflict or relating to another, so that those foundational competencies are the internal competencies. Couldn't say more about that. And then the fifth is responsible decision making. And here's the 6 competencies that go along, sub-competencies that go along with that. This is really about what goes on inside and then bringing that into the world in terms of making smart and responsible decisions. So it's identifying a problem and then, thinking about possible solutions. So this is really great for thinking about how the consequences and what might happen if I were to take this action. You also have evaluating and reflecting, and then there's ethical responsibility in there. So I'm not going to go into too much of the research here, but I do want to just point out that SEL programming has been around for a very long time. There was a meta study, which is basically a meta-analysis of a meta-analysis is basically looking at tons of different studies. It's not just a single study or a single research finding. It's basically analysis of, in this particular one, 213 studies that involved SEL programming. And this covered K through 12 and, 270,000 students, as you can see. And so you can look this up, the references at the bottom. And through this analysis, there were, very significant student gains as listed there, seen from SEL programming. And not only were there gains, but there was a reduced risk for failure and other things that we see that are challenging with students. So there was also another study here. And this study was, what was interesting about this, that this was students were looked at that had received SEL programming, and then they were followed from a young age to an older age. And there were positive outcomes that were seen over time. and then there were reduced outcomes that none of us really want to see with our young people. So this showed not only does it supportive in at the time, but over a long period of time in terms of evaluating future outcomes. So then just to kind of recap, CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, has outlined 5 competencies for SEL or social emotional learning, and they're shown here: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And I'm going to do a quick stop share here and come back to me. I just want to thank you for being with me today and learning about these SEL competencies. I truly hope that this was useful for you. This is a really great start to understand these different competencies, and we have many modules on how to develop these competencies in young people, and how we've set up these modules for you is basically 3 levels of learning them. So there's first an intellectual understanding of a tool. For example, we have a tool called the stress scale. So what is the tool? How does it work? And basically why is it useful for young people? So that's your intellectual understanding. And then the second part of that is an experiential understanding of the tool. So we take you through you applying the tool to your own life. And it's only from experience that then we can really get a deeper level of understanding and model it with our young people. And the fact of the matter is, just because we're adults doesn't mean we have our competencies developed any more than young people do. Some of us do, but some of us don't. We're all lifelong learners, and we're always developing our competencies. It's not like this person has it and this person doesn't. It's a lifelong process, and it is a process, not an event. So I shared with you the 2 stages of how we share the different tools. And so the first is intellectual, the second one is an experiential understanding of it, and the third is integrating it, how to integrate it with either individuals or groups, with students. And then you get some tools to integrate it into your own life as well. So I hope this was useful, and I hope to see you in some of the other modules. Have a great day, everyone.